Part 1. The Humiliation. Ambassador Daniel Carter adjusted his uniform as the massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened before him. The room was enormous, stretching upward for nearly 100 meters with seats carved into the curved walls like a giant amphitheater. Representatives from 37 different alien species sat in their designated areas, watching as the human delegate walked toward the central speaking platform. Daniel had made this walk many times over the past 12 years, since humanity had been granted membership in the Council. Each time, he felt the weight of alien eyes upon him. Each time, he sensed the quiet contempt that most species held for his kind. Humanity was the youngest civilization in this chamber. The others had been traveling between stars for thousands or even millions of years before humans had even learned to make fire. The High Speaker of the Council was unnamed. His body was made of living crystal that shifted colors based on his mood. Right now, he glowed a cold blue that Daniel had learned to associate with dismissal and arrogance. Stood at the highest point of the chamber, looking down at all the other species like a king surveying his subjects. "The representative from Earth may speak," announced. His voice was translated through the small device in Daniel's ear, but even through the translation, the boredom in his tone was obvious. Daniel cleared his throat and activated the holographic display in front of him. Images of Earth appeared, followed by maps of human colonies scattered across a small region of the galaxy. "Honored members of the Council," Daniel began, "I come before you today to formally request expansion rights into the frontier. As you know, humanity's population continues to grow. Ours is overcrowded, and our current colonies are reaching their limits. The frontier contains 17 habitable worlds that are currently unclaimed by any Council species. We ask for permission to settle these worlds and develop them for our people." He paused and looked around the chamber. The ambassador, a serpentine creature with scales that shimmered green and gold, was whispering to his aide. The delegation, insect-like beings with clicking mandibles, seemed to be paying no attention at all. The representative, a four-eyed female named, was openly smiling in a way that made Daniel uncomfortable. Crystals flickered with pale yellow light. "The Council has received your request, Ambassador Carter. We have deliberated on this matter for the past 3 cycles." Daniel felt a small spark of hope. 3 cycles meant they had actually discussed it seriously. Perhaps there was a chance. "Our decision is as follows," continued. "The request for expansion into the frontier is—" The hope in Daniel's chest turned cold. He opened his mouth to protest, but was not finished. "Furthermore, this Council has determined that humanity poses a growing concern to galactic stability. Your species has shown patterns of aggression that are troubling to many member worlds. Your military expansion over the past decade has not gone unnoticed." Daniel felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. "Our military exists only for defense. We have never attacked any Council species." "That is precisely why we are acting now," spoke up from her seat. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she looked at Daniel with open contempt. "Before you become a threat that cannot be contained." Nodded his crystalline head. "The Council has voted to impose mandatory restrictions on human military capabilities. You will reduce your fleet strength by 60% within 1 standard cycle. You will decommission all vessels above cruiser class. You will submit to regular inspections by Council observers to ensure compliance." The chamber erupted in murmurs of approval. Daniel heard laughter from somewhere in the section. They were clicking their mandibles in what he recognized as their version of applause. "This is outrageous," Daniel said, his voice rising despite his efforts to remain calm. "We signed the Accords of Unity when we joined this Council. Those accords guarantee every member species the right to self-defense. You cannot simply strip away our military because you find us inconvenient. The accords give the Council authority to take action when a species threatens galactic peace," replied coolly. We have determined that humanity falls into that category. Based on what evidence? Daniel demanded. Based on your history, the ambassador hissed. He slithered forward slightly in his seat, his forked tongue flickering. Your species has spent most of its existence at war with itself. You developed nuclear weapons before you developed interstellar travel. You are violent by nature, and it is only a matter of time before that violence is directed at others. More laughter echoed through the chamber. Daniel felt heat rising in his face, but he forced himself to stay composed. Every species has conflicts in its past, he said. That does not mean we cannot change. We have been members of this council for 12 years without a single hostile action against any other world. 12 years, said with a mocking smile. A blink of an eye. They have been peaceful for 40,000 years. They have maintained harmony for over 1,000,000. You cannot compare your brief moment of restraint to true civilization. Daniel looked around the chamber one more time, searching for any sign of support. The species of tall and slender humanoids who had always been polite to humanity looked away when he met their eyes. The massive rock-like beings who had traded with human merchants for years remained silent and still. Not one species spoke in defense of Earth. Back in Geneva, Secretary General Moore watched the proceedings through a live feed. Her office was filled with military advisors and political leaders, all of them staring at screens showing Daniel's isolated figure in that vast alien chamber. Felt something twist in her stomach. It was not fear. It was something older and colder. It was the feeling of being treated as less than human by creatures who claimed to be civilized. Ambassador Carter said, "You will accept these terms, or humanity will face immediate expulsion from the Galactic Council. All trade agreements will be terminated. All diplomatic relations will be severed. Your species will be isolated from galactic civilization entirely." Daniel's voice was steady when he responded, though could see the tension in his shoulders. "I must consult with my government before I can give you an answer." "You have 1 hour," declared. "Use it wisely." As Daniel walked out of the chamber, the laughter followed him. The ambassador made a remark in his native language that caused his entire delegation to erupt in hissing amusement. They clicked and chittered. Even the usually stoic rumbled with what might have been quiet mockery. Moore turned off the screen and faced the men and women in her office. Admiral Christopher stood near the window, his face like stone. General Samuel Grant sat at the conference table with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Well," said quietly, "now we know exactly where we stand with them." "We always knew," Admiral replied. "They never saw us as equals, they never will." Nodded slowly. 12 years of diplomacy, 12 years of careful compromise and patient negotiation, 12 years of swallowing their pride and following rules they had no part in making. And this was the result: mockery, humiliation, demands for surrender dressed up as conditions for peace. She walked to her desk and sat down heavily in her chair. The weight of 10 billion human lives pressed down on her shoulders. Every decision she made in the next hour would shape the future of her entire species. "Get me everything we have," she said finally. "Every contingency plan, every hidden project, everything we have been keeping secret from the Council. It is time to see exactly what our options are." The hour had begun, and Moore was done playing by their rules. Part 2: The Decision. The emergency session of the World Security Council came together faster than any meeting in human history. Within 20 minutes of Daniel Carter's transmission from the Galactic Council chamber, leaders from every major nation appeared on screens around Moore's conference room. Presidents and prime ministers, generals and admirals, scientists and strategists filled the holographic displays like a wall of anxious faces. Stood at the center of the room with her hands clasped behind her back. She had already watched the recording of Daniel's humiliation 3 times. Each viewing made her angrier than the last. "You have all seen what happened," she said without preamble. The Galactic Council has demanded that we reduce our military by 60%. They have our request for expansion into the frontier. They have threatened to expel us from the Council and cut off all trade if we do not comply. Prime Minister George of the United Kingdom shook his head slowly on his screen. This is extortion, plain and simple. They are using their economic power to force us into submission. It is worse than extortion, said President Maria Santos of Brazil. They are treating us like a conquered people, like we have already lost a war we never fought. Admiral Christopher stepped forward. The old naval commander had spent his entire career preparing for threats that most people did not know existed. He had been warning about this day for years. If we accept their terms, said grimly, we will be defenseless. 60% reduction means we would have barely enough ships to patrol our own solar system. Any species that wanted to attack us could do so without fear of meaningful resistance. Finance Minister Lisa spoke up from her position near the window. But if we refuse, we lose access to galactic trade networks. Our economy depends on those connections now. 70% of our advanced technology comes from trade with Council species. Our medical industry alone would collapse without pharmaceuticals. So we are trapped, said General Young from the European Defense Command. Accept and become weak. Refuse and become poor. Listen to the arguments bounce back and forth across the room. Fear pulled against pride. Practicality wrestled with dignity. She understood both sides. She had spent 30 years in politics learning how to find compromise and middle ground. But as she listened to her colleagues debate surrender versus resistance, something shifted inside her. She thought about the laughter in that alien chamber. She thought about the way had looked down at Daniel Carter like he was an insect. She thought about generations of humans who would grow up knowing that their species had been bullied into submission by creatures who saw them as nothing more than primitive savages. What are our actual capabilities? Asked suddenly. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. I am asking, she continued slowly, what we could actually do if we chose not to accept their terms. Not in theory, in practice. Admiral and General Grant exchanged a long look. Something passed between them that the other people in the room did not quite understand. Madam Secretary, Grant said carefully, are you asking about the special projects? I am asking about everything. Grant nodded and tapped a command into his tablet. The main holographic display shifted to show a star map with dozens of markers scattered across human territory and beyond. For the past 12 years, he began, certain elements within the military and scientific communities have been working on technologies that we never reported to the Galactic Council. We called it the Contingency Program. Why was I not informed of this? Demanded President. Because officially it does not exist, Grant replied. Only a handful of people knew. We kept it compartmentalized precisely for situations like this one. He zoomed in on a marker near Jupiter's orbit. This is Station Prometheus. On paper, it is a deep space research facility studying solar radiation. In reality, it is a shipyard. We have been building warships there for 8 years. Ships with technologies that exceed treaty specifications by a significant margin. Felt her heart beating faster. How significant? Our fastest cruiser can travel at 3 times the speed of any vessel. Our weapons systems use directed energy principles that the Council species have not yet developed. Our shields are based on quantum field manipulation that even the have-not mastered. Another marker lit up, this one on the far side of the moon. Here we have weapons manufacturing. Missiles that can adapt to enemy countermeasures in real time, drone swarms with distributed intelligence, planetary defense systems that can shoot down an invasion fleet before it reaches orbit. Stared at the display. How is any of this possible? The Council species have been spacefaring for millions of years. How could we develop technology that surpasses theirs in just 12 years? Grant smiled grimly. Because they stopped trying, Madam Secretary. When you have been the most powerful civilization in the galaxy for 1,000,000 years, you get comfortable. You stop innovating. You rely on the same technologies that worked for your ancestors because you never needed anything better. Picked up the explanation. Humans are different. We have been fighting each other for our entire existence. We never stop looking for new ways to win. While they were resting on their achievements, we were working around the clock to catch up and surpass them. Turn to Lisa. You said our economy would collapse without council trade. Is that still true if we have these technologies? Hesitated, then shook her head slowly. If we have independent manufacturing capacity for advanced technology, then no. We would face hardships, certainly, but we could survive. It would take time to restructure our economy, but it is possible. Walked to the window and looked out at the city of Geneva below. Millions of people going about their daily lives, trusting their leaders to make the right decisions for their future. She thought about the colonies on Mars and Venus and the moons of Jupiter. She thought about the mining operations in the asteroid belt and the research stations orbiting distant stars. All of it dependent on the goodwill of species who had just demonstrated exactly how little they respected humanity. How long have we been preparing for this? She asked quietly. Since the day we signed the treaty, Grant admitted. Some of us never trusted them. We hoped we would never need any of this, but we built it anyway, just in case. Nodded slowly. The decision was already forming in her mind. She knew it was dangerous. She knew it could lead to war and death on a scale humanity had never known. But she also knew that there was no real choice. They could accept slow subjugation now, or they could take their chances fighting for their future. She turned back to face the room full of worried faces. "Contact Ambassador Carter," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. "Tell him to deliver our response personally to the full council." "What response, Madam Secretary?" asked President Santos. Looked at each screen in turn, meeting the eyes of every leader who would share responsibility for what came next. "Tell him that humanity is done asking permission. Tell him that we will not accept their terms. Tell him that as of this moment, we are withdrawing from the Galactic Council and every treaty we ever signed with them." The room erupted in shocked voices, but raised her hand for silence. "We did not start this fight," she said. "They did. They pushed us into a corner and left us with no good options, so we will take the only option they left us." She paused and took a deep breath. "We will tear up every treaty and build our own future. Whatever comes next, we will face it standing on our own 2 feet." The countdown to humanity's response had begun, and there was no turning back. Part 3: The Declaration. The hour was almost over when Ambassador Daniel Carter walked back into the Galactic Council chamber. The alien delegates had not moved from their seats during the break. They had been discussing humanity's inevitable surrender, making jokes about how the young species would learn its place in the galactic order. His crystalline form glowed with satisfied blue light as he watched the human approach the speaking platform. The High Speaker was certain that Earth had no choice but to accept the Council's terms. Where else could they go? What else could they do? "Ambassador Carter," announced, "the hour has passed. You will now deliver humanity's response to the Council's requirements." Daniel stopped at the center of the platform. He looked different somehow. The other delegates could not quite identify what had changed, but there was something in the way he stood, something in the set of his shoulders that had not been there before. The nervous diplomat who had pleaded for expansion rights was gone. In his place stood a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. "I have consulted with my government," Daniel said clearly. "I have received our official response." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small crystalline cube. It glowed faintly with stored data, containing digital copies of every agreement that humanity had signed with the Galactic Council and its member species. 12 years of treaties and accords, trade agreements and military limitations, cultural exchanges, and scientific partnerships. Every promise humanity had made was stored in that tiny object. Daniel held the cube up so that every delegate in the chamber could see it. "This contains every treaty between Earth and this council," he announced. "Every word of every agreement we have signed since joining this body 12 years ago." He placed the cube carefully on the speaking platform in front of him. Then he raised his boot and brought it down hard on the crystal, shattering it into 1,000 sparkling fragments. The chamber went absolutely silent. Even the translators seemed to stop working for a moment as every alien species struggled to understand what had just happened. His crystalline body flashed bright crimson with shock and fury. "What is the meaning of this outrage?" Daniel brushed the crystal dust from his uniform and looked up at the high speaker with calm eyes. "The meaning is exactly what it appears to be. As of this moment, the United Earth government formally withdraws from the Galactic Council. All treaties are null and void. All agreements are terminated. All obligations are canceled." The chamber exploded into chaos. Alien voices shouted in dozens of languages that the translators struggled to process. The ambassador was hissing so loudly that his aide had to hold him back from slithering toward the platform. They were clicking their mandibles in what sounded like alarm rather than amusement. Even the massive were rumbling with obvious disturbance. "You cannot do this," shouted from her seat. Her 4 eyes were wide with disbelief. "You are bound by galactic law. Withdrawal requires a formal petition and a vote of the full council." "Galactic law," Daniel repeated the words as if tasting something bitter. "Your law, written by you for your benefit, designed to keep species like humanity forever beneath your feet." He shook his head slowly. "We never agreed to that law. We were told to accept it or be entry to the galactic community. That is not agreement. That is coercion." "This is madness," the ambassador hissed. "You are signing your own death warrant. The council will not allow this rebellion to stand." Daniel turned to face the Serpentine delegate directly. "Rebellion implies that we were ever truly part of your order. We were not. We were guests who were barely tolerated, servants who were expected to know our place and be grateful for scraps from your table." His voice grew harder. "We are done being grateful." Had regained some of his composure, though his crystalline form still flickered with angry red pulses. "Ambassador Carter, I urge you to reconsider. If humanity leaves this council, you will face consequences that you cannot possibly imagine. Economic isolation, military action, complete exclusion from civilized space." "Civilized," Daniel said the word with open contempt. "Is that what you call yourselves? You sat in this chamber and laughed at us. You mocked us for being young, for having conflicts in our history, for not measuring up to your ancient standards. And then you demanded that we surrender our ability to defend ourselves." He looked around at all the alien faces watching him. "That is not civilization. That is tyranny dressed up in pretty words." He straightened his uniform and prepared to deliver the final message. "So here is humanity's response to your demands. We will not reduce our fleet. We will not accept your inspections. We will not beg for permission to expand into territories that no one else wants. Instead, we are establishing a simple policy." He paused to make sure every delegate was paying attention. "Stay out of human space. Any vessel that enters our territory without explicit permission will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. Any attack on human citizens or property will be met with immediate military response. Any attempt at economic warfare will be treated as an act of aggression." "You are threatening the council." His voice was almost incredulous. "No," Daniel replied. "I am informing the council of the new reality. You wanted us to be the aggressive species you always claimed we were. Congratulations. You have finally pushed us far enough to prove you right." He turned and began walking toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the stunned silence that had fallen over the chamber. "You are making a terrible mistake," called after him. "You cannot stand against the combined might of the Galactic Council. We have fleets that number in the tens of thousands. We have technologies you cannot comprehend. We have been fighting wars since before your species learned to walk upright." Daniel stopped at the door and looked back over his shoulder. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the entire chamber. "You have numbers, you have history, you have technology that you stopped improving 100,000 years ago because you were too comfortable to keep innovating." He smiled, and there was something dangerous in that expression. "But we have something you do not have. We have spent our entire existence fighting against impossible odds. We have survived ice ages and plagues and world wars. We have clawed our way up from nothing to reach the stars." He pushed open the door. "So go ahead," he said. "Send your fleets, try to put us back in our place. You wanted to know what humanity is capable of when we stop playing by your rules." His smile widened. "You are about to find out." The door closed behind him, leaving the Galactic Council in stunned silence. Secretary General Moore watched the transmission from her office in Geneva. She saw the shattered crystal on the platform. She heard Daniel's words echo through the chamber. She watched the faces of the alien delegates as they realized that everything had changed. "Recall all diplomatic personnel from Council space," she ordered quietly. "Activate all defense systems. Alert every colony and outpost that we are now on a war footing." Her aide hesitated. "Madam Secretary, are we really going to war with the entire galaxy?" Looked at the frozen image of the council chamber on her screen. 37 species, millions of years of combined history, resources beyond human imagination. "If they force us to fight," she said, "then yes, we will go to war with the entire galaxy, and we will win." The die was cast. Humanity had declared its independence from the galactic order. Whatever came next, there was no going back. Part 4: The War. The first attack came 32 days after humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council. They had always been the most aggressive of the Council species, and their ambassador had taken Daniel Carter's defiance as a personal insult. He convinced his government that a swift strike would bring the upstart humans back to their knees before anyone else could act. They chose the colony world of New Houston as their target. It was a mining planet on the edge of human space, home to 800,000 people who lived in domed cities, surrounded by endless fields of mineral extractors. They believed it would be an easy victory. They sent 30 warships, more than enough to overwhelm the small defense fleet that protected the colony. Captain Nancy Palmer was in command of the carrier Independence when the fleet appeared at the edge of the system. She had been expecting them. Intelligence reports had tracked their departure from space 5 days earlier, and General Grant had personally briefed her on the weapons systems she was about to deploy for the first time in actual combat. "All ships battle stations," Nancy ordered calmly. "This is what we trained for. Stay focused and trust your equipment." The human defense fleet consisted of just 10 vessels. The Independence was the largest, carrying 200 fighter craft in its massive bays. The other 9 ships were destroyers and cruisers, all of them equipped with technology that they had never seen. The commander was named. He was a veteran of dozens of minor conflicts and considered himself an expert in space warfare. When he saw the tiny human fleet moving to intercept his 30 ships, he allowed himself a hissing laugh. "The humans are even more foolish than we thought," he told his officers. "They should be running for their miserable little colony and begging for mercy." His confidence lasted exactly 4 minutes. The Independence launched its fighters in a coordinated wave that moved with precision they had never witnessed. These were not the clumsy human craft that Council observers had studied for years. They were sleek and fast, powered by engines that pushed them to speeds no pilot could match. And then the destroyers opened fire. Beams of directed energy cut through shields like they were made of paper. The first ship to take a hit was a heavy cruiser that had considered almost invulnerable. One moment it was moving into attack formation. The next moment it was a cloud of expanding debris. 3 more ships died in the first volley, watched in horror as human weapons tore through his fleet with impossible efficiency. "Return fire," he screamed at his officers. "All weapons, maximum power." The ships responded with everything they had. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds streaked toward the human vessels. Most of them missed entirely as the human ships maneuvered with agility that should have been impossible for craft their size. The few shots that found their targets splashed harmlessly against shields that glowed with strange quantum patterns. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, 26 ships had been destroyed. His flagship was crippled and drifting. The 4 remaining vessels of his fleet limped away at maximum speed, carrying tales of human ferocity that would spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Captain Nancy Palmer watched them go without pursuing. Her orders had been clear: defend the colony, demonstrate humanity's strength, let the survivors tell others what they had witnessed. "Casualties report," she said quietly. Her first officer checked his displays. 3 fighters lost. The destroyer Lincoln took minor damage to its secondary hull. No fatalities. Nancy nodded slowly. 3 fighters against 26 capital ships. It was a victory beyond anything she had dared to hope for. News of the Battle of New Houston reached the Galactic Council within hours. The reaction was a mixture of shock and fury. They demanded immediate assistance to avenge their defeat. Other species were more cautious, wondering if perhaps they had underestimated the young humans more severely than they realized. But the attacks continued. Over the following months, other species tested humanity's resolve. They sent raiders to intercept human cargo ships. They dispatched assassins to kill Secretary General Moore. A coalition of smaller species attempted to blockade human trade routes. Every attack was met with devastating response. General Samuel Grant coordinated the campaign from a massive bunker complex beneath the Rocky Mountains. Holographic displays covered every wall, showing real-time information from across human space and beyond. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment, and now he was watching his preparations pay off. "The raids have stopped completely," his aide reported one morning. "After we destroyed their staging base, they seem to have lost their appetite for conflict." "And the assassination attempts?" "All neutralized. Our counterintelligence teams have traced the network back to there. Secretary Moore has authorized a response." Grant nodded grimly. They had tried to kill the leader of humanity. They would learn that such actions came with consequences. 3 days later, a single human ship appeared in orbit around the capital world. It made no hostile moves. It simply broadcast a message on all frequencies. "This is the human vessel Resolute. We are here to deliver a message to the government. Your attempt to assassinate Secretary General Moore has been noted. You have 48 hours to deliver the individuals responsible for this action to human custody. If you fail to comply, we will consider it an act of war." The government responded with defiant refusal. They believed that one ship could not threaten their heavily defended. They were wrong. The real breakthrough in the war came 6 months after Daniel Carter's declaration. Dr. Helen Brooks was a physicist working at the Lunar Research Station, and she had spent her career studying theories that most scientists considered impossible. When the war began, General Grant gave her unlimited resources and a simple order: find something that will change everything. She found it. Dimensional folding was a concept that Council scientists had theorized about for centuries. The ability to bend space itself, to create shortcuts between distant points, to appear anywhere in the galaxy without crossing the space in between. No species had ever achieved it. Until now. The first test of the dimensional drive took place in a remote sector far from any inhabited world. A small human ship activated its experimental engine and vanished from normal space. It reappeared 3 seconds later on the other side of the galaxy, transmitted a confirmation signal, and returned before anyone knew it had gone. Moore received the news in her office. Dr. Brooks explained the implications over a secure channel. "We can strike anywhere," Brooks said, her voice trembling with excitement and exhaustion. "Anywhere in the galaxy, and we can return before they can respond. Their fleets are useless against us now. Their defenses mean nothing. We have just made distance itself obsolete." Understood immediately. This was not just a weapon. This was the end of the war before it had truly begun. "Prepare a demonstration," she ordered. "Something that will make the Council understand exactly what they are dealing with." 1 week later, a fleet of human ships appeared in the sacred orbital zone above the. They bypassed every defense, ignored every patrol, and arrived at the heart of Council space without warning. They deployed 100 non-lethal warheads that detonated with electromagnetic pulses, disabling the entire planetary defense grid. Then they vanished before a single shot could be fired in response. Received Moore's message an hour later. It contained only one sentence. "Now you know how it feels to be helpless." The war continued for another 2 years, but from that moment on, everyone knew how it would end. Humanity had not just survived. Humanity had become the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and they were only getting stronger. Part 5: The New Order. 3 years had passed since Daniel Carter crushed the treaty crystal on the floor of the Galactic Council chamber. 3 years of war, of sacrifice, of humanity proving again and again that they would not be conquered or controlled. Now, on a bright spring morning in Geneva, the galaxy came to Earth. The new diplomatic complex had been built specifically for this occasion. It rose above the city like a monument to everything humanity had achieved. Its curved walls made of gleaming metal and transparent panels that let sunlight flood into every room. The central chamber was designed to hold representatives from dozens of species, with seats arranged in a circle that put everyone on equal footing. No one would look down on anyone here. Secretary General Moore stood at the entrance, watching as alien shuttles descended from orbit and landed on the surrounding platforms. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray and her face marked by the stress of leading humanity through its greatest crisis. But her eyes were clear and her posture was straight. She had earned every one of those gray hairs. Daniel Carter stood beside her. He was no longer just an ambassador. 3 years of war had transformed him into Secretary of Interstellar Affairs, the voice of humanity in all dealings with alien species. He had been present at the darkest moments of the conflict and the victories. He had watched friends die and enemies fall. He was ready for this day. "They are actually coming," he said quietly. "Part of me still cannot believe it." Nodded. "They had no choice. We made sure of that." The delegation arrived first. Their ambassador was not, who had died of shame shortly after his disastrous defeat at New Houston. The new representative was younger and more cautious, moving with careful respect as he entered the chamber. Behind him came their mandibles clicking softly in what might have been nervousness. They sent a new ambassador as well, their previous representative having been surrendered to human custody 2 years ago. Species after species took their seats. The who had quietly supported humanity during the darkest days of the war. The who had eventually switched sides after human ships proved capable of bypassing their legendary defensive formations. Smaller civilizations that had watched the conflict from a distance and now wanted to be on the winning side. And finally, the entered the chamber slowly. His crystalline form no longer glowed with the arrogant colors of 3 years ago. The blues and reds had faded to muted purple, the color of uncertainty and acceptance. The High Speaker of the Galactic Council had come to Earth to acknowledge that everything he believed about the universe had been wrong. Moore took her place at the center of the chamber and waited until all the delegates were seated. The room fell silent as every eye turned to face the human leader. "Thank you for coming," she began. Her voice was calm and measured. I know that many of you traveled a great distance to be here today. I know that some of you come from species that were at war with humanity just months ago. I appreciate your willingness to put aside past conflicts and discuss the future. We had little choice, of the said bitterly. You made it very clear what would happen to those who continued to resist. Met the alien's four eyes without flinching. Yes, we did, and I will not apologize for defending our people and our territory. You forced this conflict upon us. We simply refused to lose. Daniel stepped forward to continue. 3 years ago, I stood before your council and asked for nothing more than fair treatment. I asked for the right to expand into territories that no one else wanted. I asked to be treated as an equal member of the galactic community. He paused. You responded with mockery, threats, and demands that we surrender our ability to defend ourselves. The ambassador shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Several other delegates looked away. You pushed us into a corner, Daniel continued. You left us with no good options, so we chose the only path you left open. We tore up every treaty and fought for our survival. He let the words hang in the air for a moment. We did not want this war, but we won it, and now we are here to decide what comes next. Stepped forward again. Humanity has had 3 years to consider what kind of galactic order we want to live in. We could use our new capabilities to dominate other species, the way you tried to dominate us. We could build an empire based on fear and force. The alien delegates tensed, waiting for the threat that they were sure was coming. But that is not who we are, said. We did not fight this war because we wanted power over others. We fought because we refused to be slaves, and we have no interest in making slaves of anyone else. She activated a holographic display that showed the structure of a new organization. We are proposing the dissolution of the old Galactic Council and the creation of a new assembly. This new body will operate on different principles. She highlighted key features as she spoke. First, equal representation for all member species, regardless of how long they have been spacefaring. A civilization that achieved interstellar travel yesterday has the same voice as one that has been among the stars for 1,000,000 years. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber. Second, no species may claim exclusive rights to unclaimed territories. Expansion will be open to all who have the capability and desire to settle new worlds. Third, military limitations will be applied equally to all members or not at all. No more demanding that young species disarm while ancient civilizations maintain massive fleets. She paused and looked at directly. And fourth, any species that violates the sovereignty of another will face the combined response of the entire assembly. No more powerful civilizations bullying weaker ones into submission. No more councils that exist only to protect the interests of those who already have power. Crystals flickered with complex patterns that Daniel could not interpret. You are proposing a fundamental restructuring of galactic civilization. Yes, agreed, we are. And if we refuse these terms? Daniel answered before could respond. Then nothing changes for us. We continue building our own alliances. We continue expanding our territory. We continue growing stronger every day. He gestured to the window where the lights of Geneva sparkled in the afternoon sun. We built our own table when you refused to give us a seat at yours. Now we are inviting you to sit with us. But the invitation is not permanent. Accept it or watch us build a future without you. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Daniel could see the calculations happening behind alien eyes. They were weighing their options, considering their chances, trying to find some alternative to accepting human leadership. But there was no alternative. Humanity held the cards now. Finally, rose from his seat. His crystalline form bent forward in a gesture of acknowledgement that no human had ever seen him make. Accept your terms, he said quietly. One by one, the other delegates followed. Even though her four eyes burned with resentment as she spoke the words. Every species that had laughed at humanity 3 years ago now pledged their cooperation with the new order. When the last delegate had spoken, Moore allowed herself a small smile. Then we have an agreement. The old council is dissolved. The new assembly begins today. She looked around the chamber at all the faces, human and alien alike. We have a chance to build something better than what came before, something based on mutual respect and genuine cooperation. Let us not waste it. Daniel Carter watched as the delegates rose and began mingling with their human counterparts. Former enemies shaking hands, ancient rivalries set aside for a new beginning. It was not perfect and it would not be easy, but it was a start. Humanity had torn up every treaty. They had fought a war against the entire galaxy, and they had emerged not as conquerors but as leaders. They had taken their rightful place among the stars. Not as guests, not as servants, as equals.